Okay then. Hello everybody and welcome. Going for a walk today, starting a new challenge somebody presented to me for weight loss. And I told them that I would document that via lives. So that's what I'm doing. This is my husband behind me and my youngest up there. My oldest is in front of me in the stroller. Sorry that this is bumpy. I'm still trying to figure out how to film this stuff. So I don't know how great it's going to look, but I figure it's still worth doing because it gives me an opportunity to connect with people live potentially, build more of an audience, document the journey, and do it in a way that doesn't necessarily conflict with what else is going on in the channel. So, basic premise behind what's going on is I have a fellow YouTuber who goes by the name of Walk Talk Vent on YouTube. That's his channel. And he presented a challenge to his followers or subscribers, I suppose is the word you go with, that you're basically supposed to do 3 different steps every day. And in the process of doing those things, you should lose about 30 pounds in 90 days, which I think is a fairly realistic amount of weight to lose in that span of time. Perhaps a little on the high side, but it is rather catchy. So I do understand why he went with that. And it is achievable. So I wouldn't be shocked if people actually did achieve that through the process of doing this challenge. And I told him that I would do the challenge too and give him, some like video documentation of how it's going for me and the results that I'm getting. Now, if you've watched my channel at all, you probably know that I do some weight loss videos that primarily center around the fact that most of the weight loss industry is really crappy. And that throughout my life of trying to lose weight, which is like 22 years now, I have discovered that most of the people who are trying to make weight loss content have no clue what they're talking about. And the reason for that primarily centers around most of them have never had to lose weight. So they don't know what issues I'm facing and what issues you're facing. So it's not necessarily helpful as far as, creating better health is concerned because they can't help you. They can't tell you how to work past the mental problem points that you come across. So that's primarily what I focus on in my channel, in my weight loss section, is how to get your brain right. Because realistically, we all already know how to lose weight. We just struggle with being able to actually stick with it and do those things and be able to fight past our cravings and be able to deal with this mental obsession with food that tends to come about when you are doing some kind of restriction dieting. So that's where I kind of have come into this game and trying to change things up. I've come up with a program called Add In Fitness that I'm creating content around that I think blends in well with what Walk Talk Vent talks about. His name is actually Jesse, so I probably will just refer to him as Jesse from here. Yeah, Cammy? What's up? You like to add your voice to the conversation? She does have a very nice voice. She has a lot of opinions. She's very chatty. We think that's primarily because Izzy is alive. So Izzy wasn't particularly chatty when she was young, but Cammy is, because Izzy's very chatty now, and we kind of suspected that. We're thinking Izzy's a sanguine personality type, if you know what that is. Basically, it means that she's destined to be a popular girl. So that's not particularly shocking that she'd be chatty. So back to weight loss. The basic premise of this challenge is that you need to walk at least 30 minutes every day. You need to drink only water. I think there's some caveats to that, but generally speaking, he said that if it's sweet, don't drink it. And then you are supposed to avoid processed sugars, which I have a little bit of an issue with as well, but that's kind of what he says. And then the 4th rule is if you don't follow all 3, or if you mess up on one, you at least need to do the other 2. So you either need to only drink water, and that's not that you can't eat things. It's just that if you're going to drink something, it should only be water and walking, or you can do walking and avoiding processed sugars, or you can drink only water, avoid processed sugars, and not walk. So you can combine them as you see fit, but that's the basic premise behind his challenge here. So I like the simplicity of it. I generally walk around 10,000 steps every day at this point. I've increased from about 7,000, but my husband works at a job that he gets like 20,000 every single day. So there's a little bit of a competitiveness involved in it, I think. I'm still nowhere near 26,000 though. And of course, on the days when he doesn't work, I generally beat him as far as steps are concerned. But all things considered, that is how our life tends to go. Okay, so the problems that I have with this weight loss program in general, water is not exactly, it's not exactly explicit on what that means. And I know that that may sound kind of dumb because you're like, water's water. What's the big deal? Well, it's not, because the water that we drink is not at all the same as the water that our native ancestors drank, meaning that we filter out all the necessary minerals that generally come in water, and therefore we make water less accessible to our bodies. And there's an idea out there that if you drink unmineralized water, it actually absorbs minerals from your body, making you more malnourished than you probably already are. And I have a theory that weight loss and the reason that people retain weight is actually more because they're not nourished, they're malnourished in some fashion, rather than they're overeating. Because there are plenty of people, like on YouTube, who are able to eat more food than you would mathematically think they should be able to eat and still remain lean. And one example is called Fit and Nerdy. She's got a very interesting channel, but she weighs about 120 pounds, and on a daily basis, she eats 2,600 calories, which is quite substantial. You would not think she'd be able to remain thin on that amount of calories. And there's an idea that people in like the 60s, for example, ate substantially more calories than we tend to eat and remained lean. And we're not really sure why, because they're not necessarily moving more than we do now, and they're far less, or they were far less knowledgeable about the science behind this stuff. So that leads me to believe that the amount we know about weight loss is actually very minimal. The amount we know about health is very minimal, and that more than likely there is a nutrient deficiency issue, because the fact that at this point in the world, our bodies hold on to excess fat, making ourselves ill, is quite bizarre, because the body doesn't do things like that for no reason. The body, by default, does its best to maintain health. So the fact that it's holding on to fat so much so that it leads to further physical issues kind of defies biology. So I definitely think there are bits of information that we don't understand going on here. But that's just a theory. I'm not going to defy the scientific teachings that are going on in the world, because I am not a scientist, nor am I a personal trainer, nor am I a nutritionist or a dietitian. So these are just concepts that I've come up with, and theories and ideas that just make sense to me, because I did learn evolutionary biology in college, and there's a lot that you can explain about people and animals and pretty much everything through basic logic of, why would this be happening? So if something's defying logic, that either means you don't understand it or that something's wrong. What the heck? The blanket fell down.
Yeah, well, why are you
keeping
moving
your
stuff
blanket off?
around?
Okay, that's much better. Much easier to push that way. Okay, so there is the basic premise of the water, I guess, is that we don't have the mineralization in it, and that leads to malnutrition. There are other things that lead to malnutrition, but malnutrition, is, my guess, is what causes us to retain weight in the first place. Which means that something that I would add to the program is ensuring that you get a rather large amount of fruits and vegetables on a daily basis. So that means, from my perspective, that you should be getting about 1 to 2 servings of vegetables at every meal, or 4 to 8 servings of vegetables every single day. Now, that's not necessarily easy to do, which is one of the reasons why I offer things like the Fiber Punch recipe, because that recipe includes superfoods like superfood greens and superfood fruits to give you the phytonutrients that you usually get from fruits and vegetables, but in a condensed form that you can drink. Because adding in a serving of vegetables to every meal is not particularly fun as far as I'm concerned. And while it would be ideal to retrain your palate to enjoy those things, that takes time. And so you kind of have to trick yourself into enjoying them, usually by pairing that with something you do enjoy, which is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily agree with the avoiding processed sugar bit. Because if you're trying to instill good habits, trying to take out bad habits can be really, really hard to do at the same time. So I personally would go with try to ensure you're getting the nutrients you need, and then worry about cutting out sugars later if you need to. Because as far as I'm concerned, a calorie is a calorie. And if you're in a calorie deficit, generally, you're going to lose weight. And you're probably not as far off from a calorie deficit as you think. That's certainly something I've been learning. And that means that there's not a whole lot you need to change, but you do need to kind of reframe the way that you think about food. So while I do understand this concept of avoiding sugar as being beneficial potentially, I think it's more beneficial to focus on vegetables. And for that, I would pair it with, the foods you really love, like cake and ice cream. Funny enough, ice cream, not as bad as you'd think. A serving of ice cream is actually quite substantial, and it only contains 160 calories or something, so really not that bad, versus cake, much more calorically dense. Yeah, we do have some pretty nice trees in here. Washington State, so very green if you can get it when it's not raining. Right, Angus?
Yep.
So it is a great environment if you're not susceptible to depression in the middle of winter. But I suppose that's why they have things like the light therapy and whatnot. So yeah, processed sugars. Another thing that I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that, is because when I actively try to avoid something, I tend to become really obsessive about it. So that's not necessarily a recipe for success in my eyes, because if I'm obsessive, the chances I'm going to be able to avoid it go down substantially. And I remember watching a webinar on this same topic where a woman's like, well, you can learn to intuitively eat if you just allow yourself to have whatever you want, because eventually you're going to get tired of that rebellion state where you're like, well, I need to eat cake every single day, because you don't need to anymore. There's no need to rebel. And as somebody who tends to be very rebellious, I'm very susceptible to that same mentality where I'm like trying to rebel against the forces of my own brain. So that's why I tend to go with trying to implement better habits again, rather than removing bad habits. And the other aspect of implementing good habits would be adding in protein, which is something I also find extremely difficult because I don't like meat. And I don't know that I am extremely weird in this. My husband doesn't tend to eat a whole lot of meat either. But if you don't eat meat, it becomes a lot harder to get the protein in that you need, especially if you don't like things like chicken or turkey, because otherwise you're left with meats that are extremely calorically dense, like beef, because there's so much fat in those. I don't know how loud these cars are. I'm going to have to check that out later, but we're getting a lot of traffic right now. But yes, getting protein in is extremely difficult. And then people suggest things like Greek yogurt, which I find absolutely disgusting. So that one's out. And then you're left with very few options, such as eating fish. But as a woman, that's considered potentially problematic, especially if you're looking at having more children, because then your mercury levels go up, and that can lead to health issues all the way, down the board for years. And that's not a good thing, clearly. Or things like cottage cheese, which I actually find I do like now, so that's helpful. But once again, dairy product, and a lot of people have issues with dairy. So what are you left with? You don't like meat and you can't eat dairy. Protein shakes? beans. But if you eat beans, you're not getting complete proteins, which means you're missing out on those BCAAs, which are vital to keeping your muscles intact and functional and building new muscle as you need to. So that leads to some issues too. And getting those BCAAs in as a vegetarian, I think is pretty close to impossible. So I don't know how vegetarians and vegans get through life, generally speaking, because it just seems like a very, very difficult thing to do. Now, there are obviously some people who know how to cook and figure that stuff out, but I am not one of them. I hate cooking, I hate cleaning. I am not the stereotypical housewife that I sometimes wish that I were. And I'm sure my husband sometimes wishes that I was. But I pretty much hate most of the things that are traditionally the woman's role. And that means I have no desire to go out and cook foods and make my bread from scratch and whatever, which I actually think would be extremely beneficial, which is actually a business idea that I would present for anybody who wants to create this, which is breads and other baked goods made with vegetables in them. Now, I know that some people find that idea kind of gross. My husband, for example, tried one of my experiments and was like, I'm not eating that. And it kind of led to a bit of an argument, I suppose. That's definitely a miscommunication thing on our part. But I tried putting some green bean puree into sugar cookies, which actually tastes pretty good. It's not as good as just straight sugar cookies, but you get more cookies and a serving of vegetables, and it really doesn't taste all that different. So I think if you were able to grind up the green beans a little bit better, it would work better, because it's the texture that I found most unappealing about that, even though it's really not that bad. But throw in zucchini instead, and you're probably going to get a better result. Add in cucumbers or something, that's probably going to be pretty good. And you could always go with lettuce, which has basically no flavor whatsoever, into pretty much anything. But you don't need to. Celery is pretty good too. Yeah. The fiber aspect is definitely good. That's why sticking with greens is so beneficial. But you definitely don't want to put kale in there, because that's going to mess with the flavor a ton. Yeah. Pretty much any of those things, like parsley, basil, it's going to add tons of flavor you don't want.
Cilantro.
I kind of wonder how people found all of these things to eat. Were they just so desperate for food, they're like, let's try this? Maybe they thought it smelled good. But I definitely wouldn't, for most of these things, be like, oh yeah, that's food. I'm going to eat that.
Ironically, I think most of it is they saw animals eating it,
Maybe.
so assumed it was safe.
I suppose that makes sense. Then again, you watch cows eating and you're like, ugh, I wouldn't want to do that. But I suppose in a forested area, they're not necessarily going to eat, grass the way that cows do now. They'd be eating more like regular foliage. But where was I? Oh, adding fruits and vegetables to foods. I definitely think it would be a brilliant business model. But yeah, you definitely don't need to add it to baked goods, which is probably more what Angus was saying he wouldn't like. Because we have things like spinach tortillas, which I think most people actually find fairly enjoyable. So obviously there are some people out there who are trying to do something similar to this, but I don't think they have the ratios right, where there's really not that much of the spinach or whatever in the tortilla, meaning it changes the color, but not much else. It doesn't change the quality of it either. Jalapeno cornbread. Well, if you like spice, sure. Personally, though, not a huge fan of spice, and Angus has what's called a geographic tongue, so he can't handle spice at all. But totally, you could add spices like that to your food. I'd probably go with something specific per flavor. So for example, if you're making something chocolate, beets tends to be a really good pairing. And then if you're making something sweet, you could totally throw something like jicama or zucchini in there. Zucchini bread's awesome. So I definitely like that one. But then of course, if you're just going with bread, you pretty much throw anything you want to in there. Green beans is definitely my default because I can buy those frozen and then puree them and mix them into things. Whereas spinach, when you cook that up, it turns into a sloppy mess, and I have no desire to eat that anymore. It's just a psychological thing, I suppose. Hello. So yeah, I'm like, that would totally be a good business option. Green bean casserole. I do love green bean casserole. It's delightful. I make that all the time. Angus doesn't like mushrooms though. He's a weirdo like that.
That's why you make it with cream of celery instead.
Ugh. No cream of celery. Cream of chicken's okay though. I don't mind that one.
Fine. We'll make it with cream of chicken then.
It is a little embarrassing to walk by people with a camera, sure. I feel like a weirdo just talking in the middle of nowhere. And then of course you're thinking, well, are these people all judging me because here I am acting like the stereotypical like teenager or whatever, spending my entire life on my phone. So there's a little bit of that going on too. We're feeling the judgment, but that's in my own head, obviously. I don't know what they're thinking. And then of course there's a piece of me that's like, well, I probably should be spending this time talking to Angus more, because we don't have all that much time, given that he works 36 to 48 hours a week, which isn't more than normal people work. Just doesn't give you a whole lot of time to work on your relationship, which is clearly an important thing to do. Yeah, important. How are you? It's Cammy. Yeah, nice to see you too. Good luck on the editing. But yeah, so doing this challenge with Jesse, seeing what kind of results we can get. I am not thinking that I'll get a whole lot of weight loss as a result, but I'm guessing I probably will see a reduction in the fat around my body. And the reason for that is the amount of muscle I seem to be putting on lately is quite extreme, which indicates that I have done severe damage to my body over the years with all the dieting that I've tried, and reduced my muscle mass down so far that my body is rapidly trying to put more on, even while doing just normal things like walking on a daily basis. Somehow I'm losing fat but not losing any weight, which is bizarre. I did not think that would be something that would happen unless you intentionally went about trying to do that, the recomposition diet. So not anticipated, but interesting. And it's kind of fun to realize that you can lose fat without losing weight, because that indicates that you can still burn more calories even though you're thinner. And that's awesome, because I don't want to have to get down to eating 1,500 calories a day just to maintain my weight. That is not ideal. I don't want to eat like a rabbit for the rest of my life. And while I do want to learn how to enjoy more vegetables and ideally cut down on some more of the calorically dense foods, I don't want to have to. I want to. So the fact that I would then be dedicated essentially to sticking with that for the rest of time is terrifying. I don't like that. So there's probably some psychological retraining that I've got to do to figure that one out. But then again, with the whole reverse dieting thing, who knows what's really possible? And that's something that I find absolutely fascinating, where people talk about weight loss like we've got it all figured out, and we really don't. The amount we know about pretty much anything in the world is pretty minimal. So science and where we are is not at all the same. Which means that you wind up in situations where people think they know the answer and they don't. Which is kind of weird to me, that people think we know that much. My husband, for example, tends to think that we have a lot of answers. And I live in a world that's much less defined. So in my book, there's a whole lot to learn. and you can't ever say that you have the answer. And I think that's terrifying to a lot of people, the notion that you can't know how anything will work out, how anything will play out, how your life's supposed to go, that you can't predict necessarily what results you'll get from what actions. And I understand that fear. It took me a long time to get comfortable with uncertainty, but that is one of the probably most interesting aspects of life is the uncertainty, where you don't necessarily see how things are going to play out, and then you can get comfortable with that idea, which allows you to explore more extreme avenues of life. Yeah, Cammy? You want mama? Yeah? You want mama? I suppose we've been going long enough. We could end the live now. I could hold you for a bit. What do you think, Cammy? Yeah? Sounds good? Okay. Well, we will end it there then. I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.